Folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
Where are we and what are we doing? I mean, just give me a little bit of history of what this is and why you decided to do it.
So we're sitting here on our porch here on our ranch, North Bridger Bison. It's located in the Shields Valley of Montana, about 30 miles northeast of Bozeman. We've got the North Bridger Mountains to the west, the Crazy Mountains to the east. The ranch is classic sagebrush steppe grassland ecosystem. And my wife, Sarah, and I, along with our two kids, Otto and Greta, we started all this from scratch in 2018.
Okay. So you're not from Montana. You're not a multi-generational rancher. Just a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
And why are you here?
Sure. So, a very non-traditional, non-linear path into ranching. I was born and raised in suburban Chicago, no agricultural background whatsoever. So ever since I was a little kid, I have loved nature and the outdoors. And that love just grew and grew and grew. And I fell in love with the West and Montana in high school and college. And then really started to care a lot more about the environment and conservation. And I ultimately decided to go to law school. And I went to law school for two reasons. One, dreamed of being an environmental lawyer. And then two, a very practical reason, every town needs a lawyer. And so I could be a lawyer in a place like Montana and have a good job. And then after law school, spent a few years as a lawyer in Chicago, which I knew wasn't for me long term. And then in 2008, my wife Sarah and I, we were getting married, and it was a pure lifestyle choice. It was we felt like if we don't do this now, we're going to wake up in 30 years. So we quit our jobs, got married, went on a honeymoon, moved to Bozeman. I ultimately ended up getting a job doing non-litigation policy work for the Natural Resources Defense Council. 5 years in Livingston, 5 years in Bozeman. And the main issue I worked on various conservation issues in the Northern Rockies in the West. But the big issue I worked on was around management policies around bison. And I fell hard, I fell in love with the species. And then, over time we had two kids, and I did not like work travel. And I was just really craving to do something that was tangible, conservation-based, land-based, on my own. Had a real entrepreneurial itch. And I'm a big meat hunter, care a lot about food and where it comes from. And our different ideas, at the end of the day, we very broadly defined, we wanted to make the world a better place. Even if it was, very, very small, very broadly defined, but we weren't, I give the example, like if we had some idea for a catchy plastic button that would have made millions of dollars, like the world doesn't need any more plastic buttons. And we kept coming back to food because when you think about it, everyone has to eat. And if you're lucky, you get to eat 3 meals a day. You factor that out across billions of people on the planet, and you realize very quickly that the production of food has major environmental and social impacts. And because, bison were always on my radar, I read about bison ranching, and, one thing led to another, and we got really serious about it. The more we read and the more we learned about regenerative agriculture and regenerative ranching, the more excited we became. And so we came to ranching because of all of the environmental benefits that ranching provides. And I think it's something that's completely missed in the general broad coverage of ranching. I think ranching's like, it's just, very unfairly vilified often. And whereas when I look at our ranch and our neighbors' ranches, I think of it as it's like this perfect system. It's just this beautiful system where you can raise food totally in sync with nature. And when people ask us or ask me, what's your management philosophy, or what's your management objectives? It's very simple. We manage for biodiversity, and we do that for 3 reasons. 1, we love biodiversity, full stop. 2, we're experiencing a global extinction crisis and losing more and more biodiversity every single day. And then 3, selfishly, the science is clear that the more biodiverse our ranch is, the more species of grasses and wildflowers, bees, butterflies, pollinators, songbirds, etc., the healthier our bison are, the more resilient the ranch is, the healthier the bison meat is, and the healthier the people that eat the meat are. So I just think it's this incredible thing where we're ranching in sync with nature, we're ranching for biodiversity, and then we have these animals, in our case bison, that don't just exist on grass, they thrive on grass. And every year provide thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of the healthiest, most nutrient-dense, delicious food you can find. And so I just am passionate about ranching, and just absolutely love it.
So, kind of walk me through the process. So, where did they come from originally?
Yeah.
Kind of what is the process of basically the bison? It's what does it do throughout the year, and how does it end up on a plate?
Sure.
So just kind of walk us through it.
Sure. So walking you through a year on the ranch, I like to think of our year as June 1st to June 1st. And so say June 1st this year, the bison, so they calve in April and May. So on June 1st, you've got 50-something calves out there with 50-something moms, so 50 pairs, 50-something yearlings, 50-something 2-year-olds, and then the bison, their natural cycle over the year, because we run things as naturally and as in sync with nature as possible. So they breed on their own, they calve on their own. So their breeding season, or their rut, is in July and August. And then they have a little over a 9-month gestation period and have those calves in April and May. So back to June 1st, we've got the animals I just talked about. And then in the summer, right now, during the growing season, we have the ranch cross-fenced into a whole bunch of different pastures. And so we are rotationally grazing the ranch, which ultimately is, the term they use now is biomimicry. We're just mimicking nature. Montana evolved for thousands and thousands of years with a hell of a lot of grazing animals. Removing animals from the landscape is completely unnatural. And the way that bison and elk and deer and pronghorn historically grazed, they'd come into an area and they'd hit it hard. They'd graze, poo, pee, wallow, churn it up, and then they'd leave for a long time. So it was high intensity, short duration, long recovery. And here, on a obviously way smaller scale, that's what we're trying to mimic, is by having a bunch of different pastures. They go into a pasture and they graze and poo and pee and wallow, and then they leave. And then we try to give that pasture a long recovery. And so that's what we're doing here on the ranch. And then we ultimately, we're a meat business. We have a direct-to-consumer bison meat business where we sell 100% of our 100% of our meat direct to consumer by the quarter half whole bison. And how that works is a individual, a couple, a family, whether in Montana or around the country, they place an order for a quarter half whole bison, put their deposit down while the animal is still alive, And then we work with Amsterdam Meat Shop west of Bozeman. They're absolutely amazing. So we field harvest year round here on the ranch, and I personally kill each bison here on the ranch. It's something that we take very seriously and are very proud of our process. And what that looks like is I drive out in our ranch truck with a bale bed on it to wherever the bison are that day. And we know who our meat animals are by ear tag. And it's the first meat animal that provides a perfect shot. And the perfect shot is about 10 yards. It's a headshot with a copper bullet. And so it's zero stress for the animal, zero stress in the meat. It's as ethical and humane as it gets for food, not just for meat, but for food. And then there's no stress in the meat. So the meat's absolutely delicious. So it's a headshot, animal drops. I lift it up with the bale bed, bleed it, take it to a different pasture where I then eviscerate it, get it back on the truck, drive to Amsterdam Meat Shop, and then they do a beautiful job skinning, dry aging, cutting, wrapping, freezing, boxing.
Could you talk about also when you're field dressing it, the other things you're doing with it that you're collecting, and kind of give us some idea of where they go?
Sure. So one of our principles is, we want to use as much of the animal as possible and ultimately just keep as much of it out of the landfill as possible. So when I go to field dress the animal, I cut its head off and then gut it and save its tongue, cheeks, heart, liver, kidneys, hanging tender. Gut pile stays in the landscape, and the scavengers do an amazing job cleaning that up. And it's ultimately great for soil health. And then some of the heads we just leave on the landscape for the scavengers. Some we send to a taxidermist to get cleaned up into Euro mounts that we sell or donate to nonprofits for charity auctions. And then the hides, we've been working with a guy west of Three Forks who buys them green, fresh, and he does all sorts of different stuff from with them. So very little ends up in the landfill, which we're very happy about.
So what is left afterwards? I mean, you get the bones and stuff, but isn't there a market for the bones too?
Yeah. So good question. So the meat ultimately goes to our customers. We save the organ meats and we give those away to friends and customers. And then we get back bags and bags of marrow bones that they cut into like 4-inch chunks that are phenomenal for bone broth or bone marrow on toast. And I'm so fanatical about it that when I take it to Amsterdam and they cut the hoof off at the elbow, I take those 4 hooves and take them back and throw them out on the landscape, because I just figure better to be in the landscape for the scavengers than in a landfill. So we are essentially using the entire bison, and then what we're not using is on the landscape for scavengers.
So we pretty well covered kind of like, what the processes are, why you guys done it, kind of a little bit of the history and stuff. Let's talk about wildlife.
Yeah.
Obviously you're a hunter yourself. Kind of tell me how important it is to take care of the land, and what is the impact on wildlife since you came here, 2018, and you've been working the land, you've got the bison on it. Tell me about is there any positive outcomes? And if there are, what are they?
Oh, I mean, ranching and wildlife, there are so many positive outcomes. I mean, I think the biggest and the first one that comes to mind is all the habitat that ranches provide for wildlife. And when I'm talking about wildlife, I'm talking about from, the tiniest little critters in the soil through bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, songbirds, waterfowl, small mammals, all the way up to, big mammals like elk and moose, carnivores, all sorts of stuff. We and all these different ranches in Montana are providing habitat for the full suite of wildlife in Montana.
So how important is hunting in our conservation model, our modern conservation model? How important is that to wildlife, and how does that work with ranching?
You'll get different answers from different ranchers, because some folks, who have, say, 500 elk on top of them all the time, like that's a real issue that they have to deal with. Yeah. That's not, we don't have that. That's not something we have to deal with. So I'll just talk about it personally. Yeah. For me, I'm an avid hunter and just love wildlife in general. And so, I saw 2 mule deer walking on the other side of the road this morning before you got here. And this time of year, we see pronghorn on a daily basis. And on our ponds, we've got nesting waterfowl. I've got a pair of nesting kestrels in the top of the barn. And so we love seeing that our ranch is providing habitat for wildlife and for birds. And, we're very proud. We made the decision, we protected our ranch. We put every acre we own under a conservation easement with the Gallatin Valley Land Trust, which means that our ranch can never be developed, can never be subdivided, can never be developed. And there's something about that just feels great, knowing that this will provide wildlife habitat forever.
Oh, that's great. Kind of a little bit different stuff. Obviously you're trying to sell to consumer, direct to consumer here. So everybody's trying to figure out a different way to skin a cat, right?
Yeah.
From cow calf to what you're doing. But we have an urbanized society, very disconnected from nature. Kind of, what do you think the reason is? Why do we have these disconnects with society today, especially urbanized society, when it comes to their food and the process of getting food on the table?
The disconnect on food and where it comes from it's huge and seems to get bigger every year. And I think it's just, most people, go through life never interacting with a farmer or a rancher or a farm or a ranch. And I'm an avid podcast listener, and we were just listening to a podcast yesterday, and they were saying that, most kids that you ask, where does a tomato come from? They say the grocery store, not the ground or from a farm. Same thing with meat. I think a lot of people think that, meat just magically appears wrapped in plastic wrap at the butcher counter. It's something that I'm passionate about, because you see more and more this messaging of eat plant-based for the environment, meatless Monday, that meat is bad, killing animals is bad. We need to avoid that. And the reality, there's this great nutritionist and ranching advocate named Diana Rogers, and she talks about how there's literally no such thing as a bloodless diet. If you eat food, you're going to be killing things. You might not be aware of it. I mean, even a vegan burger, like the corn, soy, wheat, monoculture, millions and millions of acres, that is the backbone of the vegan burger industry. Those places are, generally speaking, they're ecological wastelands. They've destroyed the wildlife habitat. It's leading to there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The chemicals and I mean, just so many different things. And then whatever's out there when the combine goes through, they're not dodging it. If we eat food, we're killing things. It's just whether you're aware of it or not. And I'm ultimately an optimist, and I see that things are slowly shifting and more people are becoming aware of this. And they're aware that, you look on the back of a box of vegan burgers and it's, 20 something ingredients, most of which you can't even pronounce. It's made in a factory. It's not good for you. And then you contrast that with food from a ranch, meat from a ranch, where you're providing wildlife habitat, providing bird habitat, providing pollinator habitat. You're sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the ground. And then at the end of the day, you're providing, like I said, thousands and thousands of pounds of very healthy, very nutrient dense food. So I think it's happening slowly, but there's definitely a shift, and people are realizing, eating plant-based for the planet, Meatless Monday, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It actually has some really horrible unintended consequences of, the monoculture farms in the Midwest and all the chemicals and all the different stuff that goes into that plant-based industry. And more people, they want to eat, they talk about like clean food and clean ingredients. And, when you eat our bison, you're eating bison. When you eat your neighbor's beef, you're eating beef. And so I think it's slowly changing, which is encouraging.
You brought up a couple of really good points there. You're talking about farming and veganism and whatnot. There's a couple things I'd love you to talk about. One would be, we have a climate crisis right now.
Oh, yeah.
We hear stories about how we need to get rid of, like in Europe, they're talking about getting rid of their cows because of the flatulence from these cows. I don't know how many cows are around the world, but there's nowhere near as many humans. I mean, it's way more humans than there are.
Sure.
Than the biomass of wildlife, or domestic species for that matter.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, to help these people understand what, we're dealing with a climate change, a climate crisis. How does the ranching you're doing, how does that kind of fall into all that?
The science is clear. We're obviously dealing with climate change and a climate crisis that we need to get our act together quickly. And it's frustrating. Things are moving too slowly. But when you look at the solutions to climate change, grazing animals are a climate solution, not a climate problem. Just look at the natural history of our planet. This planet evolved with millions and millions and millions of grazing animals. And here in Montana, grazing animals pass through, they eat grass, they leave. As the grass grows, following the grazing, that grass is sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil. This idea that somehow grazing animals are bad for the planet, it's crazy. And again, you don't need to be a climate scientist or a PhD biologist. Just think of the natural history of our planet. It evolved with tens and tens of millions of grazing animals. Grazing animals on this planet are natural, and removing grazing animals is unnatural.
Great. So the other crisis they talk about, or we hear a lot about, is this biodiversity crisis. You talked a little bit about that. How does that work again with farming and it's a monoculture, right?
Yeah.
And I like to say the whole job of the farmer is not only to grow that one crop, but it's to kill everything below and above the ground too, that wants to eat that crop, right? So how do we square up with that agricultural industry as far as farming goes? Because we don't want to demonize farmers here, but what we're talking about a biodiversity crisis. How do they fall into that picture, and how do you compare what you're doing versus what they're doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, when it comes to the biodiversity crisis and farming and ranching, I think that, regenerative agriculture is this very hot term right now. And, and ultimately what it means is the soil scientist Nicole Master said it best when she said, I hate the word sustainability because to sustain something is to literally just to keep it the same, whereas to regenerate something is to improve it. And so when I think about biodiversity and regenerative agriculture, I think that without question, the easiest and most effective way to achieve those goals is through ranching. One of the core principles of regenerative agriculture is integrating animals into your food production system. And I love farmers, and I don't want to pick on farmers, but if you're growing spinach, you're at war with everything that wants to eat that spinach. Whereas out here on a Montana grassland, the science is clear that the more diversity we have on our ranch, the more species of grasses and wildflowers and pollinators and bees and everything, the healthier our soil is, the more resilient the ranch is, the healthier the bison are, the healthier their meat is. So we manage for biodiversity, and by doing so, the more plants and diversity you have on the landscape, that's all providing habitat for different critters, and particularly when it comes to pollinators, and then particularly, the industrial monoculture cropping industry that's technically plant-based, and all of the herbicides and pesticides and chemicals that go into that, they're ecological disasters and have destroyed so much habitat for wildlife, and particularly for pollinators. There's a pollinator crisis right now with bees and butterflies. And yet, when I walk around our ranch or look at our neighbors' ranches, they're just teeming with all sorts of different bees and butterflies. So I just, again, it's an example of the incredible benefits that come with ranching in Montana that I just don't think are fully understood and appreciated, and certainly lost when you get into a Whole Foods grocery store in a big city and someone, and again, I don't blame the consumer, because people are doing the best they can. And, this is my profession and my passion, and so I love geeking out on it. But for your average, person who's trying to work and pay rent and feed the kids and get by, when they stop at the grocery store and they're like, I want to eat right for the climate tonight, and so I'm going to buy a vegan burger, it breaks my heart, because what they should be doing is going and buying a great grass-fed steak. And so it's just it's an interesting conundrum that we find ourselves faced with in being pushed over and over, eat plant-based for the climate, eat plant-based, when so much of that is what's driving our biodiversity crisis. And I guess I just, when it comes to, what are the solutions to climate change and the solutions to the biodiversity crisis, I just, have seen too much and read too much about, human solutions, things that sound great on day one, and then 50 years later we say, oh my God, that was the worst idea ever. And so, I believe in nature. I bet on nature. And so grazing animals, ranching, all of this biodiversity, it's natural. It's been around for thousands of years. So yeah, I'm passionate about this.
Talking about bison, one of the, obviously I'm kind of getting into this whole thing about multi-generational ranchers. Will the next ranching generation stay on there? And I do want you to talk about that too with your family.
Yeah.
Let's do that right now.
Sure.
You got 2 young kids.
Yeah.
This is yours and your wife's dream. You're raising your kids out here in this. You're talking about your son being able to go and camp and do the things there, be outdoors.
Yep.
You're a hunter yourself, fisherman. How important even though you're not a multi-generational family, how important is this ranch for your family, and why?
It's a great question. This ranch is extremely important for our family, for Sarah, myself, and Otto and Greta. Our kids are so deeply connected to the natural world. They have words in their vocabulary that I didn't have until I was in my 30s. And so much of it's just through osmosis, just living here, being around it constantly. And they've really developed a real passion for nature, and a deep care and love and respect for nature. So raising our kids here is one of the coolest and most rewarding parts of this whole deal. But when I think about the long-term future of the ranch, we put our ranch under a conservation easement with the Gallatin Valley Land Trust a couple years ago. So that means that this ranch can never be developed. And that makes me feel great, that knowing that this ranch will provide wildlife habitat and food forever. But as far as our kids go, my kids are the most important thing in the world to me. And I want them to do whatever the hell they want to do. I want them to chase their dreams and live their life, whatever that looks like. And so if that's, going and working for Saturday Night Live or something else, wonderful. If that's coming back to the ranch, wonderful. But definitely, and I've thought a lot about this recently, there is no expectation that our kids are going to come back here and take over the ranch. I just want them to live a full, wonderful life, and I support them in whatever that looks like.
Okay, great. So it is a little bit different.
A little bit different, because a lot of people are like,
yeah, I want to come in here.
Yeah,
take over what I'm passionate about.
It's like, yeah, I really don't. I feel the opposite. I just want them to do whatever's going to make them happy.
That's exactly what I tell my kids.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're flipping burgers or you're president of the United States. If whatever you're happy,
yeah,
I'm happy for you.
Exactly.
So I'm just not taking care of you when you're 56.
Right.
We're raising your kids for you. All right, so we were talking about bison earlier. We talked about the fact that one of the things that we're getting into this film is kind of what the impact of American Prairie Reserve is, because obviously there's a lot. There's a conflict.
Sure.
For whatever reasons, there are people there that see change, don't like change. There's other people that are like, okay, we love the idea of nature being free roaming bison. Kind of go back to before Lewis and Clark were here. I think the terminology I've been told is they want to create the very first private national park.
Huh.
So, which, private national park's an oxymoron.
Sure.
But, hey, you can create anything in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
So, knowing what you're doing here, there's a car coming here, I'll keep talking.
Yeah. Knowing
what you're doing here and what your impact is in the land. Now, of course, you've got pastures here. You're rotating them there. You don't have 3 million acres, because that's basically what it'll end up being if they're able to purchase all the million acres in holdings of private land with 2 million acres of BLM. You're in the bison, you're in the food industry, you're in bison, you know how they work, how they live and stuff. What are your thoughts of American Prairie Reserve and what they're doing? Of course, you're a sportsman too, right?
Sure.
So I looked at it kind of like, wow, it'd kind of be kind of a cool thing to have wild bison and maybe we could hunt them. But again, it's still that word private. And it's not like Nature Conservancy brokering Plum Creek land, to turn around and sell to the state or federal government. And, I've got people who say, well, we don't want the state and federal government to own it either. So,
Sure.
It's like there's all these conflicts here. So, from your opinion, how do you look at APR and what is the reality you think for bison on the ground and, as a bison rancher yourself?
When it comes to American Prairie Reserve, I'm not in the weeds on exactly what they're doing or what their current plans are. But, I think, I guess, my view on it is, at the end of the day, it's these are private land transactions, willing seller, willing buyer. And they want to create a nature reserve. So very, very different than what we're doing here as a working ranch. I love the fact that they provide public access for camping, hunting, hiking, etc. I certainly hope that's always the case. My understanding is that it is. And they've obviously been a lightning rod for controversy. And I don't live up there. I just don't know all the details. The folks up there would know better. But I do think that APR gets a little too much focus, and that there's, not enough focus on, the fictional show Yellowstone on television and what that's doing to Montana. So if people are worried about what APR is doing to Montana, if they're ultimately building a public nature reserve, that's a hell of a lot better than subdivisions and housing developments. And also, I know one of the issues with APR is, it's a nature reserve, it's not a ranch, but again, the show Yellowstone, how many ranches are being bought by really wealthy people from out of state, getting rid of the animals and using it as a private hunting reserve for a few weeks a year? Like, that seems to get no mention whatsoever. I think that, the issues, like everything in life, it's not black and white, it's nuanced. I'm not up there. And so I feel, I just don't know the details. But I think that at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, it's these are private land transactions. And if they want to build a public nature reserve, they have every right to do it. And I don't understand why APR is such a lightning rod for controversy when all these other ranches are being bought up. The livestock are being taken off, and they're used as private hunting reserves for a few weeks a year, and those seem to get a free pass from the public. When, it seems a little hypocritical.
Talk to me about that. How has the television show Yellowstone affected Montana? Good, bad, indifferent. Why? Give me some ideas.
I mean, when I talk about the show Yellowstone, I laugh because I avoided watching it for a while. And then, so many people were like, you got to see this, you got to see this. And I watched like the first episode, and like the cattle are on the wrong side of the fence. And then like a war scene broke out. And I was like, what? Like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I only made it through 2 or 3 episodes, but it was just so, far-fetched and fictional that I don't watch the show. And but it's clearly having an impact on Montana. Most of what I know about it is just, there's been a lot of articles and op-eds and editorials and thoughtful pieces written about the impact of the show Yellowstone on Montana. And so my understanding is that it's pretty simple. The show Yellowstone has glorified Montana and glorified ranching. And so a lot of people from around the country want to buy land and buy ranches and move to Montana and be like Kevin Costner. And so it has, land prices have spiked dramatically. And there's all sorts of issues that come with that as far as affordable housing, workforce, and on and on and on. But that's my understanding of the impact of the show in a nutshell.
Why, and we'll just kind of finish this unless you want to add something.
Sure.
Why should people buy bison meat? And, not necessarily from you, but I mean, you can give me your elevator speech if you want. Why is, whether it be bison or elk or deer or antelope, getting, finding food on the land, why should we try to have more of that here in our society?
So if you're asking me, hey, Matt, why should I be your customer? Why should I buy bison meat from you? There are a bunch of reasons, and I'll name a few. The way we ranch here, it's great for the environment, it's great for climate, it's great for biodiversity. It's unbelievably healthy meat, and it's absolutely delicious.
So what does the future hold for ranching? Just kind of universally, based on what you've experienced so far, that you've been involved in, what you know. What do you think the future holds?
I obviously don't know, but I could take a guess. And I think that this pattern we're seeing of more and more folks wanting to buy healthy grass-fed meat because they know how good it is for their body, and they know how unhealthy ultra-processed foods are for their physical health and their mental health. So I think that is only going to continue. And then I hope that the current stranglehold that the literally handful of massive international companies that control the livestock markets and the beef industry in the United States, I hope that changes a lot. And I hope that ranchers have a lot more autonomy in where they market their animals, how they market their animals, that ranchers are able to make more money to keep working ranches on the landscape, keep family ranches on the landscape. They do so much for land, wildlife, rural communities. And so things are starting to shift way too slowly. But I hope that happens and happens fast.
Okay, that's good. Is there anything you want to add?
Eat with your eyes wide open. And the thought process there is, as we talked about earlier, with what we eat and what we wear and how we travel, we're all killing stuff. We know that. And so let's just be honest about it and try to be more intentional in how we eat and how we buy our food. And I think that's something that's at the core of what we're doing is we really are transparent in how we do things. And ultimately, we just think it's a beautiful process that, we ranch with nature, we ranch for biodiversity, we field harvest these animals here on the ranch. They provide thousands of pounds of nutrient-dense, delicious meat. And I just love it.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.